It's not been easy, as I say, being Rory McIlroy. He's been such a prodigy and has been in the public eye for so long that I think it's remarkable when you sort of look at how beloved he is, the way kids chant his name. He's got such a natural charisma, such an easy way with the media. He's so thoughtful and reflective. But it's hard doing that all the time. It's easier doing what Tiger did in the prime of Tiger's career, which is avoiding the public at all costs. With Rory, he's been so welcoming, so open, and gets such a kick out of people the way Arnold Palmer did. That beautiful natural charisma, he really is the modern day Palmer.
Tim Gay joining me here, author of Rory Land. Thanks so much for taking the time to join the Golfers Journal podcast. And Tim, let me tell you, as from one author to another, what a great year. I have book envy. What a great year to have a book out, to have a biography out about Rory McIlroy.
And not only well-timed, Tom, but fortuitously titled. Had no idea that the whole world would become part of Rory Land on Masters Sunday, that we would all be exposed to the incredible roller coaster ride that Rory's been on, the up and down part of it. And of course, he proved beyond doubt that he is the world's global golfing icon.
No doubt about that. Yeah, the timing, I imagine, for folks who don't know publishing schedules and how books work.
Yes.
I mean, this book has a ton of research in it, which I definitely want to dig into. But the process on this, it starts well before, of course, Rory wins the Masters. How long was the process?
About 2.5 years. I started in January of 23. It was the weekend where Rory beat Patrick Reed down in Dubai. So I thought it was a good harbinger for the book that Rory won the weekend. The book had been green-lighted. And I went to about a dozen different tournaments that Rory played in over the next couple of years.
So good timing to start it. And certainly, as we said, very good time to release it. Rory will definitely we're going into the PGA Championship at Quail Hollow. And Rory, of course, will be the big headline.
Yep.
And the player everyone's talking about. So we certainly want to break that down and talk about his chances at Quail Hollow and the PGA. But I want to talk about Rory Land. First of all, Rory Land. Where is it? What is it? What is Rory Land?
Rory Land is a beautiful place, Tom, and it's also a place where head-scratching things happen. And anybody who watched a Masters Sunday knows exactly what I'm talking about. Rory Land is a place where you can have a 3-shot lead at Augusta National and everything going your way, and all you have to do is hit a little 85-yard pitch into the middle of the green at 13 and set up a birdie opportunity and maybe take a 4-shot lead down the stretch at Augusta. And instead you dump the easiest chip he'll have all season into the tributary of Rays Creek and make double bogey. So it's a place where great things happen, where some inexplicable things happen. And it's been that way for Rory from the beginning. He grew up in a very tough place to grow up, the Northern Ireland of the 1990s. Did you ever watch Derry Girls, the sitcom that was so popular out of Ireland?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, it was set in Rory McIlroy's childhood. And if you looked at Derry Girls, you looked at some of the society and cultural pressures that Rory has faced not only in his childhood, but in his whole life. As I say in the book, Tom, he was a man who grew up without a country. He's not completely Irish. He's not really British, even though he's lived in the United States for more than a dozen years. He's not really American either. And he has created his own little world, his own little fiefdom that I call Rory Land.
Rory Land, indeed. I want to definitely, there's a lot of, yes, Rory and place and where he's from. The book gets into that quite deeply, a lot of research into his lineage, and I want to touch on those things. But returning to the Masters, in defense of Rory, it's an easy chip, except for it's the fourth Sunday at the Masters.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, what was your reaction like watching the Masters, having a Rory book coming out in a few weeks and watching that final round? What was that like for you?
Tom, I suspect it was like you watching the Phillies in the World Series. There are good moments and there are not so good moments.
Indeed.
But I actually, as I told our friend Lauren Rubenstein, the great Canadian journalist and golf historian, that I have to stand up. When Rory's in a major championship, for every shot, I have to stand up. I don't know if that's, trying to bring him good luck or what, but I have to admit I sprawled on the floor when that ball went into the creek at number 13.
I don't think you were the only one.
I was not alone. Millions of people all over the world had become citizens of Rory Land. And as I write in the new epilogue, a lot of us wanted to seek extradition from Rory Land at that moment, renounce our citizenship. He makes things interesting. It's always a roller coaster with him on and off the course, and it's been that way since he was just a prodigy golfer.
Always interesting. And so so you mentioned writing an epilogue, because I was curious about that, right? So you have, the book's at this point, it's well into production.
It's going to be in bookstores here in about a week. So
what is the launch date?
It's a little, right. May 13th is the actual official publication date.
So how are you able to fit in? Right. So like at this point, you're excited. Rory won the Masters, but does that like change your narrative? Can I get an epilogue into the book at this point? Like, what do you do? Right.
Well, what we did was put an epilogue in for the UK and Irish, the European editions, and also for the digital edition here in North America. And if there are, I'm knocking wood here, any North American reprints, of course, the epilogue will appear in that as well.
Okay. And does it shift the narrative?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Does this Masters win sort of is it because it sort of shifts the narrative a little bit in some ways?
Oh, sure. It absolutely shifts the narrative. Just to give you an idea, on the very first page of the book, Tom, I call him the perpetual lost boy of Augusta National. That is no longer the case.
It is not.
I'm very happy to report no longer the case. So that rendered that particular statement obsolete. And of course, there's a lot in the book about his frustrations over the last 11 years in failing to win another major championship. At the age of 25, he won his fourth major championship, which put him in very elite company. Only Jack, Tiger, had won as many majors at that point. In 2011, when he won the U.S. Open at Congressional, Rory became the youngest U.S. Open champion since Bobby Jones 9 decades before. Now, think about that. That's just an extraordinary moment in golf history. He was at that level, a level that very few players have ever achieved. And for whatever reason, he stalled out for 11 years before winning just a few weeks ago at Augusta.
So let's talk about that stall out. The book sort of takes us through a lot of it.
Yeah.
If people say why the gap, were you able to sort of put your finger on any moments or reasons?
First, it's all mental. As Yogi Berra said, baseball is 90% half mental. That's absolutely true in spades when it comes to golf, as you know as well as anyone. And I think what happened, a couple of things. As I say in the book, Rory has got this prodigious gift of a beautiful natural golf swing. You wrote some wonderful stuff on Rory's swing that I incorporated into the book. He has got Ben Hogan's hip turn. He has got Sam Snead's shoulder turn, as Tom Watson and Andy North told me. It's a very abrupt, radical move. He makes it look so smooth, but it's a very severe kind of swing. And in the full swing, that's what enables him to hit the ball so far, but it makes his chipping and pitching a little tough, especially I think his hip movement, that Hogan hip swirl. I think often gets him into trouble in his short game. He's been working very hard. It's the reason he went out to see Butch Harmon in early 2024 to try to control the hip movement. But I think between the mental challenge of going a number of years without winning another major after they came so easily to him early in his career, plus that abrupt hip and shoulder move, I think it's been tough for Rory to sort of learn to moderate his swing, to flight down those wedges. But he's getting better and better at it. If you remember just a few weeks ago at the Players' Championship, that gorgeous little feathered 9-iron he played in the playoff to beat J.J. Spawn, number 17, the Island Green. Remember, they just hit an absolutely
it was a beauty
little 9-iron. And Spawn looked at that, looked inside Rory's bag and said, well, if Rory McIlroy hit 9, I've got to hit 8, and promptly, airmailed the green and put one into the water. And Rory ended up, waltzing his way to the playoff win.
Yeah, no, it's funny to hear that too, thinking about, for those of us with hips that don't move, to think about having to tone down one's hip movement, what a beautiful problem that would be to have. But
it is beautiful. And it was fun talking to the likes of Tom Watson and Andy North, because I asked Tom what he thought the secret to Rory's swing was, and he immediately went to shoulder turn and spent about 5 minutes discussing great shoulder turns in the game. The most famous of which is really Snead's. And it's very unusual. The great Dan Jenkins looked at Rory as a kid and said he had Hogan's swing, Snead's tempo, Nelson's temperament, and Arnold Palmer's charisma. Now think about that. 4 of the absolute iconic figures in golf history, and somehow Rory embodied all of them.
Not a bad recipe.
No.
At all. Now, when you came into writing the book, Tim, did you come in to it? What was your motivation for it? Did you come in as a Rory fan? Did you come in thinking, why hasn't Rory won more? There's always, when you're going to undertake, 2.5 years of research and work, it has to be there. That passion has to be there. What was your passion for the subject?
The passion was, I have always been a Rory fan. As I have told people, I've only come off the sofa watching 2 18-year-old athletes. One was Roger Federer, and you could see from Federer's footwork and his beautiful finesse on the court that he was going to become an all-time great, and he just built on the natural ability he had as a teenager. When Rory made his major championship debut, age 18, still an amateur, at Carnoustie in 2007, I remember watching the ESPN highlights of his 68, his first round 68 at Carnoustie. Extraordinary to think that an 18-year-old could shoot a 68 on such a difficult course, as you know, as well as anyone.
Indeed.
He was the only player in the entire field that day to go without a bogey. And I remember ESPN showing the highlights that night, Tom, and just being mesmerized by that action, that beautiful flow of the swing, and thinking, wow, if this kid can keep his head on straight, he's going to be an absolute all-timer.
Indeed. And he certainly, it looks like that's the case. He's made the case.
Sure hope so. I think there's a very good possibility that his Masters win is going to essentially liberate him. I think the monkey's off his back, and I don't think he's going to feel anywhere close to the sort of pressure that he has felt over the last few years in trying to complete the career Grand Slam. Now that that's behind him, I think he's going to compete and win a lot of major championships.
I would have to agree. Aside from now, the new pressure is the seasonal Grand Slam. You have to win all the majors in 1 year now. We'll talk about that later. But in doing the book, I thought one of the really, as the book opens and begins, you have a whole family tree. Rory's family tree, which I thought was really interesting. So in your research of Rory's lineage, what insights did that give you into Rory? What did you discover?
Well, a couple of things, and the whole thing is extraordinary, and I don't know exactly where the Coynes are from in Ireland, but you probably have
West
a similar background. At some point, a member of the Coyne family got the gumption or was somehow given the resources to emigrate to the United States. About 2 million people did following the potato famines of the 19th century.
Yep.
And how many millions and millions of Americans owe their lineage and owe the extraordinary opportunity that our ancestors gave us to people like your great-great-grandfather or whomever it might have been. In Rory's case, the guy who broke the poverty cycle was his paternal grandfather, Jimmy, Jerry's dad. Jimmy was one of the few Catholics who was fortunate enough to get a job at the Belfast shipyards after World War II. It had been almost exclusively the domain of Protestants. To know Northern Ireland history is to know that there has been, awful sectarian hatred between Protestants and Catholics, and not just in the past century, but this dates back 8 or 9 centuries of very harsh British oppression in the north of Ireland and very harsh discrimination against Catholics. Jimmy McIlroy came from a family that had known nothing but poverty. He'd grown up in a ghetto in West Belfast, a little Catholic neighborhood that there were no Protestants in, that it was just sort of derelict row houses. The River Lagan formed one of its boundaries. Grew up in very tough circumstances, but again, got very fortunate, got a job at the Belfast shipyards. He and his wife, Eva, were able to save money. And just as they were starting a family in the late 1950s, were able to move from that ghetto in West Belfast out to Hollywood, which is about 7 miles north and east along the Belfast Lough. A beautiful little place. And they moved to an integrated community, a place where the sectarian tension was a little less severe than it was in the rest of the north of Ireland. And Jimmy McIlroy carved out a very good life for himself and his family. Jerry and his siblings grew up in a very comfortable neighborhood with green grass and fresh air, neither one of which would have existed in West Belfast. And those kids, Jerry, his 2 brothers, his sister, have all had a very good life, thanks to their parents, Rory's grandparents. Jimmy was able to join the Hollywood Golf Club, developed, by all accounts, a very sharp short game. Jerry played with his brothers growing up at the Hollywood Golf Club. And you've seen Jerry McIlroy swing many times. I'm sure most of the folks plugged into this podcast have seen him. He's got absolutely beautiful tempo. Mm-hmm. Talk about Sam Snead, just beautiful, languid golf swing, and is still a single-digit handicapper and still very competitive when they play at St. Andrews in the fall. And he played with Rory this past winter at Pebble Beach, where Rory won the individual championship. But remarkable story of changing the whole trajectory of the McIlroy family through hard work and discipline. And Rory benefited from that. Jerry had Rory out while Rory was still in short pants. I'm sure people have seen the video of Rory at age 9 chipping balls into that front-loading washing machine after he'd won the world's 10 and other youth championship at drought, and became an instant overnight sensation in the north of Ireland, the vessel into which the sports-crazed Irish sort of poured all of their hopes and dreams, which is enormous pressure on anyone, but especially a 9-year-old kid. Rory was able to handle that pressure, became one of the best amateur golfers in the world, developed a very close relationship in Irish junior golf with his great friend from the Republic of Ireland, Shane Lowry. That friendship has been a beautiful thing for all of us to watch as they won in New Orleans a year ago, provided a lot of entertainment. This past weekend in New Orleans came up a little bit short. They had sort of a rocky end to their round on Friday. Otherwise, they would have been right there in the mix on Sunday. But it is a beautiful story, but like anything involved in Ireland, it has its sad, even tragic side to it as well. Ireland is William Butler Yeats called it a terrible beauty. It's hard to know where the beauty ends and where the sadness begins. And much of Rory's career has kind of, he's ricocheted back and forth between accomplishing great things and being thoroughly frustrated and a little self-destructive on the golf course.
That is a really interesting insight. Rory is a product of that place. And as you mentioned, it is a complicated place. And
he is the child, as I say in the book, Tom, he's the child and grandchild of conflict. And none of us should be surprised that he grew up conflicted both on the golf course and off. And if you think about Rory, think about the way he has jumped from issue to issue, changed his mind about things, been clearly conflicted on live, on involvement in the Olympic Games, on the need to modulate golf equipment, shorten the distance the modern golf ball travels. He has been on all sides of those issues and every bit as passionate about his old conviction as he is about the new. He's a conflicted soul living in a pretty convoluted world. We're all there with Rory. And, if you look at his family history, both sides, how deeply devastated they were by the sectarian troubles. A great uncle on his paternal side murdered because he was Catholic, living in a Protestant neighborhood, and a very successful computer engineer. This was in the early 1970s. Think about how many computer engineers there were in Ireland in the early 1970s, not many. He was completely self-taught, extraordinary, enterprising guy, traveling on behalf of his British-based company. And if you've seen the movie Belfast, Kenneth Branagh's wonderful sort of biographical film, there's a character in the film who is the object of much suspicion because he's traveling abroad. And if you traveled abroad during the 1960s and 70s, both sides, both Protestant and Catholics, had a very jaded view of that because there was fear that you were going to be influenced by forces either pro or con in Britain and other places. And that is sadly what happened to Rory's great uncle, murdered in his home, his wife in the next room, 4 children sleeping in the house, 6 o'clock in the morning. And it, would appear that 2, Protestant guerrillas from one of the, pro-British Protestant extremist groups then flourishing in Northern Ireland committed the crime. It's never been solved. Back then, crimes where Catholics were the victim in Northern Ireland were often never solved, and they still have, to this day, not been solved. The family, I believe, just 2 years ago received more information from police authorities in Northern Ireland, but they chose to maintain what can only be described as a dignified silence about the awful crime. I'm sure you've read Say Nothing, Patrick Radden Keefe's incredible book, and the series that appeared on Netflix just, I think, earlier this year. In Northern Ireland, saying nothing is always preferable to saying nothing and running the risk of stirring more hatred from the other side.
Say Nothing was indeed a Book of the Month selection in the Broken Tea Society Book Club. So shout out to our book club members on our Discord server.
Literally could not put the book down.
Yeah.
That well done.
Very well done and amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing story. And that's still today, information's coming out in 2025 that these are still sort of some reparations are trying to be made for things that happened during the Troubles, et cetera. That was one of the big revelations in the book for me. I didn't know that Rory's family line had touched the Troubles or touched by the Troubles that closely.
And his mother, of course, grew up in Lurgan, which during the Troubles was known as Murder Town. and that is a distinction that no place in Northern Ireland wanted. But she grew up in a place where there was a heavy British military presence, awful tit-for-tat killings, shootings, bombings, assassinations, back and forth throughout her childhood. And her dad had lost his job in the linen industry. They were forced, she and her many siblings were forced to grow up in a indigent state subsidized housing project. We would call them the projects here in the States. In the north of Ireland, it's known as an estate, but it was a Catholic state subsidized apartment complex. And if you saw the Netflix version of Say Nothing, you know that one of the neighborhoods that they depicted was just full of graffiti and murals and anti-British slogans and all the rest. That was very much what Rosie McIlroy experienced as a child.
Yeah. And the book points out, though, a new mural in Northern Ireland
Yes.
that is a more hopeful one, speaking to a new Irish hero,
It
Rory's
sure is.
Rory's
And
mural.
strangely enough, Rory is the embodiment of that new hope and that new era.
Yeah.
That year, 1998, is the year that George Mitchell and the Clinton administration brokered what has been a lasting peace, now 26 years, and really the first ceasefire that ever held between the Protestant and Catholic extremists. And that was the spring when Rory won that tournament at Doral and came back to Greater Belfast, sort of a conquering hero. And he became very much part of the new era, the new hope for Northern Ireland. Senator Mitchell is still alive, and I had the honor of interviewing him during the course of research for the book. And he recognizes that. He was never a golf fan, but he's become one in the last 15 years or so since Rory has come into prominence, because he recognizes that Rory is this extraordinary symbol of what Northern Ireland can be if it can only put the troubles in its past. And it's a remarkable thing. And you know this from your visits to Belfast, to sort of walk through those old troubled neighborhoods and see some hope coming to them. It's not going to happen as rapidly as we'd all like it to be. We're still a ways away from a united Ireland, but it's happening, and it's a beautiful thing to witness.
It is a beautiful thing. Belfast is such a beautiful town.
It is.
And it's a great place to, we'll take our golf tours there on our way to Ardglass or Royal County Down or Portrush. And it's just such a beautiful, wonderful Irish and European city. So yes, hope on the horizon. May it long may it last. And yeah, indeed, Rory embodying, he's 9 years old, I think, when the Good Friday Accords are signed, and
Correct.
Hopefully embodying what has been a new day in Northern Ireland. I hope that trajectory certainly continues for all of Ireland. Speaking of Portrush, there's going to be a little tournament there this year.
Yeah, there sure is.
There sure is. Your book goes through a lot of different moments and turning points and significant tournaments in Rory's history. Let's start at Portrush and tell me a little bit about his relationship with Portrush.
Well, his dad, of course, was one of the better amateur golfers in Northern Ireland. So when Rory was growing up and he got big enough, he used to caddy for his dad and went up to Royal Portrush, down to County Down. I mean, think about growing up a half hour from Royal County Down and about 45 minutes from Royal Portrush. Those are two of the best links courses in the world, two of the best golf courses, period, in the world. And Rory was exposed to them as a kid. As a 16-year-old, Rory won the North of Ireland Amateur Championship at Royal Portrush. He did not win it. he shot in the second round of qualifying. He shot a mere 61, broke the course record by 3 shots at Royal Portrush, and astounded everyone, including his parents, Michael Bannon, his coach. When Michael Bannon got the call that night at home at Bangor, which is a little town about 10 miles north of Hollywood, Banner thought that the guy on the other end was pulling his leg, didn't think it was possible that any 16-year-old could possibly shoot a 61 at Royal Portrush, but he did. I was very fortunate, Tom, to interview one of the guys who was in Rory's threesome that day and to have him provide his perspective on what it was like to see birdie and eagle and birdie one after the other fall, and Rory just as a kid just soaking up every moment. Of course, there were no gallery ropes. And when the word leaked out to the Portrush village that the kid from Hollywood was on a heater, people ran out. There were no marshals, no restraining ropes, no nothing. It looks like if you go online, the BBC did a wonderful documentary where they took people's personal video from that and sort of spliced together a little documentary on it. It looks more like an Easter egg hunt than a golf tournament because everyone is just sort of mashed in there with Rory. An absolutely incredible moment. It is one of probably the 3 or 4 most famous amateur rounds of golf ever shot. It got him into the U.S. golf magazines. I remember looking at Golf Digest and seeing a couple of paragraphs on Rory's amazing feat, and in my head pronouncing his last name McIlroy, and being surprised 2 years later when he played in the British Open at Carnoustie that it was actually McIlroy.
There you go. So a good start at Portrush.
Yeah,
it's
good
funny
start.
you bring that up because when I was doing a course called Ireland, and this was 2007, and I was doing some interviews along the way and with some Irish golf writers, and it was recommended to me, like, there's this kid in the north, like you've got to play golf with this kid on your trip, and like, that's cool. I'm just trying to make it to the next day here. But one of them, I'm like, that'd be fun. What's his name? And they gave me a phone number. It was Rory's house. So I remember calling and talking to his mom, and they're like, he's like, no, he's off playing and da-da-da. It's like, I don't know what he did with the number. I'm sure it's changed. I don't think today you could call up his mom and say, can Rory come out and play? But that was a wild time. Yeah. The whole island seemed to be aware of like this thing happening in Northern Ireland, this extraordinary golf, and 61 at Portrush. But he didn't win the tournament, right? He didn't win the North that year.
He ended up being eliminated, I think, in the second round of match play. But he had put his name, he had already been a household name in Ireland, but that is what made him a phenomenon, not just in Ireland and Europe, but all over the world, and everyone soon had their eyes on him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the north of Ireland's huge. They have the 4. We got the north, which I always like going through this list. North is played at Portrush. West is Ross's Point.
Right.
South is Lahinch.
Yeah.
East is Baltray, County Louth.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I was quizzing myself.
Rotate. Yeah, I haven't quite figured it all out, but it does rotate at least on occasion. But I think the North is always at Portrush, which is where it should be. As you know, it's just a stunning golf course.
Yes, and we're all going to see it this year. So the last time the Open was at Portrush, maybe a bit of a Rory Land low moment. For sure.
That's what you get with Rory Land, the lows as well as the highs, and there was no lower moment than Rory on the first tee in the first round. And I think, again, it was all mental, Tom. He kept on telling himself all week, this is just another tournament. I'm not going to be nervous. Well, it was not just another tournament. It was the first time that the Open Championship had been played in the north of Ireland in a half century. It was a huge deal because it was the royal and ancients' way of saying to the north of Ireland, You're beyond the sectarian trouble. We trust you to hold this tournament, and we want to acknowledge and celebrate Royal Portrush and the wonderful golfing tradition in Northern Ireland. So it was a very big deal, just as this summer's tournament at Portrush will be a very big deal. And I think Rory felt that pressure. I think it's probably safe to say that half of Hollywood had taken the train over, at least driven, around the loch to see Rory play at Portrush. That first tee was absolutely packed. His knees were shaking. As I say in the book, it was Ryder Cup pressure, but taken up to 11. And he hit an iron off the tee, and it was very windy, blowing right to left. And if you look at the YouTube video of that moment, I don't think Rory really picked up a target. It was like you and me on the first tee of a great golf course, where you pray to the gods of golf, just let me get it airborne and let me get off this first tee before I humiliate myself.
I know it well.
And he pulled that iron and starts yelling, no, no, no. And it went into, there's out of bounds on the left, there's out of bounds on the right on the first tee is, at Portrush, which may be a violation of the spirit of links golf, but nevertheless, there are out of bounds markers there. And he hit it out of bounds, then hit his next one into some very nasty stuff. Hit his next one, hole high green, but in the deep cabbage, had to take a drop. Long story short, he ends up making a snowman, an 8, on the very first hole. He was 10 months into the dream of his lifetime, which was playing an Open Championship in his homeland, and he was 4 over par. The next day, he shot 65, which I believe tied the then course record for the renovated Portrush, but it wasn't enough. He fell one shot short of making the cut. So he's got some serious unfinished business at Portrush, and I think he is going to be locked in, laser focused, and I think you're going to see Rory at his absolute best in July.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be something? If he took that place to its knees, wouldn't that just be incredible?
Yeah, the way he did it, his other Open win was at Liverpool, Hoylake, in 2014, and he ended up winning, I believe, by 2 shots over Ricky Fowler, and I think Sergio was also in that mix. But he dominated that tournament from the first swing, and he would love to do that again and put everyone at ease and have the kind of celebratory march up 18 that Shane enjoyed in 2019, which was a beautiful thing. By coincidence, we, Elizabeth and I took our kids and new son-in-law at that point to Portrush for the Tuesday practice round, and we got to follow Shane and Rory around. And make a long story short, we now have a 1-year-old grandson named Shane.
There you go.
Kelly and Connor say it's not named in honor of Shane Lowry, but I have my doubts.
Well,
I think maybe the idea was planted.
Congratulations, nonetheless.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good.
He's a very cute kid.
It would be. I wonder what would be bigger. Rory, obviously, finishing the Grand Slam at the Masters, that can't ever be underestimated. But winning the Open in Northern Ireland at Portrush, that's. I wonder if that should come true. How does one rank them? Probably Masters 1, Portrush right at 1A. It would be hard
not to rank that number 1, given the history and the culture and all the remarkable things that Rory said about what playing at Portrush meant to him back in 2019. Tom, if you think about it, this year really sets up very nicely for Rory in the majors. In just a couple of weeks, he'll be in Charlotte. Quail Hollow is a place where he's won 4 times on tour, finished second another time. He knows it like the back of his hand. It's just really fits his eye. He can hit bombs on certain holes. He knows how to play those short par 4s, really knows how to play those par 5s, which is how you score at Quail Hollow. He's always giving himself makeable eagle opportunities. Then the U.S. Open is at Oakmont outside Pittsburgh, which, as you know, favors sluggers. Nicklaus always did well there. Palmer did well there. Got into the playoff in '62 against Nicklaus there. It's always been sort of a big hitter's paradise. And then you have, as we've been talking, the Open Championship at Portrush. If anyone could ever take a run at all four in one calendar year, I mean, Nicklaus did in '72, and Jordan did sort of without, it wasn't his design to win all four, but he won the first two and came darn close to winning the Open Championship at St. Andrews in 2015. But as Jeff Shackelford said in his newsletter just a couple of weeks ago, look, we may be witnessing some very extraordinary golf history. I don't want to put a whammy on it, but it's something to look at.
It's certainly something we will be looking. Absolutely. Yeah. It is certainly something to look at. So Quail Hollow. Yeah, as you say, I mean, it's more than, yes, he's won there, but there are other reasons, and I think in terms of, what do you think are the things that make him a favorite, aside from just, yes, he has a good history there, but in terms of maybe where he is with his mental game, where he is in his life, like what lines up for him in the PGA Championship?
I think everything is calmer now. I think he's taken himself out of the live debate, which is a good thing. I don't think he helped his own stature within the game or his own credibility with the public by kind of being all over the map on live. I think he has very smartly gone quiet on that, and it would be in his enlightened self-interest to stay that way. He loves Charlotte, comfortable there. He opened up his first restaurant Puttery, which is the indoor miniature golf eatery. That's, I think, done pretty well. There's one here in Washington. But his very first one was Puttery. He always calls Charlotte his sort of home away from home. Loves the place, has got a lot of good friends there. Things are much calmer, as you know, in his personal life. I just think everything is set up well for Rory to compete and be in the mix on Sunday at Quail Hollow. And nobody knows how to close the deal at Quail Hollow like Rory. It was his very first U.S. Tour win back when he was still 20 years old. He shot a 62 to overtake Phil Mickelson, who was then coming off a Masters championship. So, and then Rory, remember, I think went, what was it, 8 under and 6 holes or whatever that was to beat Schauffele a year ago at Quail Hollow. He had 2 eagles in the span of 5 holes, something that doesn't happen very often to the Tim and Tom in this conversation. But Rory plays Quail Hollow with that kind of confidence.
Nice. Good to know. Good information there. I didn't know he was such a Charlotte guy. Aside from playing well at Quail Hollow. Very
fond of the place, constantly singing its praises. And they have welcomed him with open arms. If you think about the way he just blistered that course to overtake Schauffele a year ago, and the fans chanting Rory, Rory, it's really like a home match for him.
Lovely. And that's funny. I have a Rory Charlotte connection. That's actually where I watched Masters Sunday, because even though I was there for the Masters that week, there was a flight cancellation, and I had to drive my wife to Charlotte instead of flying out of Augusta. And got to Charlotte in the airport. I'm like, he's about to tee off. I'm not going back, rather than go back and watch it in person, just checked in a hotel in Charlotte. So maybe that was the right place to be, down there with the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
And did you take a sprawl when Rory hit it into the drink at 13? Or
I was laying in bed. I was honestly getting a little bit, because when Rory wins majors, he wins them. He tends to win them by a lot. I thought, all right, this is a sort of walk in the park, and I was kind of a little sleepy from a long trip, and just remember jolted up in the bed like, what's going on? and then it was on. And if you want entertaining golf, there was certainly that feeling of like, okay, cool, now we have a tournament, but wait, no, now it's going the wrong way. So it was in some ways it's like, okay, it's going to be close, and then he wasn't even ahead, and then so we all know that story. But you mentioned Liv, Tim, and I don't want to dig too deeply on it, but I'm just curious. Obviously, a lot of talk about Rory's involvement with Liv, and the book does get into his feelings about it, at least in terms of his feelings about how the messaging changed and how things changed so quickly, and where he was left in the middle of that. Do you think that Liv there's too much made of the impact it had on him, or not enough made about the impact that it had on him?
Well, I'm not a clinical psychologist, and I've never interviewed Rory. As you know, this was a completely unauthorized biography. But just from the outside looking in, I think it had a pretty profound impact on him. He felt personally betrayed, and he should have felt personally betrayed. Jay Monahan, commissioner of the PGA Tour, and members of his board kept on sending Rory out in front of the Klieg lights in 2022 and for the first 6 months of 2023, denouncing Liv, challenging the integrity of anyone who went to Liv, in very belligerent tones, condemning the money behind Liv. And then on June 6th of 23, just before the U.S. Open, Monahan pulled the rug out from under Rory and, announced the framework agreement with Liv, and said there was going to be a partnership moving forward, and it was just going to be a matter of a little bit of time before they reached, rapprochement and some sort of permanent agreement. Here we are more than almost 2 years later, and still we are no further along in terms of reaching a final deal with Liv and Piff than we were on June 6th of 23. And I think Rory is, personally dejected, disillusioned with all of that. It would be hard not to be. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, I think he very smartly has taken himself out. I wish he would take himself out completely, because for a while, he took himself off of the advisory board to the tour, but then kept on insinuating himself back into the debate and got into, I think, a needless pissing match with both Jordan Spieth and Patrick Cantlay, who are members of the board and are trying to represent the best interests of the tour membership. Rory had come to the conclusion that Piff involvement, and a substantial one, with the tour was inevitable, and that the tour and its board would be much better off reaching some kind of accommodation with Liv and Piff rather than continue fighting what he came to view as a losing battle. Now, it remains to be seen just how big a share and how big a stake Liv is going to have in the future deliberations of the tour. The tour, as you know, has gotten money from John Henry and the Fenway Group. I think $1 billion in working capital, with the capability of getting another $1 billion if needed. So that gave the tour the kind of financial muscle it always needed. The truth is, as a 501c6, as a basically philanthropic organization, the tour was always going to be sort of cash poor, and its business model was never going to work for the long haul. They were putting too much pressure on their corporate sponsors. I think everyone now recognizes that model has to change. The tour has adopted a new for-profit enterprise,
right?
And I think over time that hopefully will give the tour a little bit more financial muscle. But look, you and I are basically fans of golf. We want the best players in the world playing the world's best courses week to week. That is not what we have right now. I miss watching John Rahm play, miss watching Cameron Smith, my son's favorite play. He is a putting and chipping genius, and I just love. As painful as it was for me to watch him beat Rory at St. Andrews in 2022 in that Open Championship, he just putted and chipped so brilliantly down the stretch that it's sort of hard not to root for Cam Smith. I'd love to see the two tours reconciled in some way.
Well, that's what's so great, Tim, about what we have coming up in the PGA Championship. We get the band back together.
Right.
4 times a year. Most of the band, or anyone, the folks you really want to see, and we go out there and see what happens. So it's going to be incredibly exciting. In doing your research for the book, give me is there an aha moment or a surprising moment in finding, anecdotes and stories about Rory that you'd say, wow, that really that's who Rory is, or that's some sort of insight into Rory that I didn't expect. What are some of your favorite anecdotes and stories?
Well, there is an ambivalence about Rory. At least there was before the Masters in his hometown, and people reluctant to talk about it. And I think Rory had, it's not been easy, as I say, being Rory McIlroy. He's been such a prodigy and has been in the public eye for so long that I think it's remarkable when you sort of look at how beloved he is, the way kids chant his name, not just in Ireland and the UK, but in the US. He is sort of one of us. As I say in the book, he is golf's Opie Taylor. There's something about that freckle-faced innocence that make people root hard for Rory. And he's everyone's kid brother. He's the kid brother we all wish we had. And it's, he's got such a natural charisma, such an easy way with the media. He's so thoughtful and reflective. But it's hard doing that all the time. It's easier doing what Tiger did in the prime of Tiger's career, which is avoiding the public at all costs. Tiger used to get his practice rounds in before practically anybody showed up at the course, avoided autograph lines whenever he could, kind of shunned the public. And you can see that in his psychology later in life. With Rory, he's been so welcoming, so open, and gets such a kick out of people the way Arnold Palmer did. That beautiful natural charisma. He really is the modern day Palmer.
Indeed. No, that's well said. You mentioned ambivalence in his hometown. How so? Tell me about that.
Yeah. And I think he addressed that just last week after the Masters win, first thing he did was fly back home to see his mom and dad who had moved into a new house and were not at Augusta to celebrate his career Grand Slam victory. And he flew back home to Belfast. They went up to Hollywood. They spent, I think, the better part of a week there. And I'm told that Rory kind of walked around town, with his daughter and just walked up and down the main street and said hi to people, which is something he needed to do. Mm-hmm. I heard from a lot of people that Rory wasn't visiting Hollywood the way he used to in the old days. It's hard. It's hard being Rory McIlroy and coming back home. But he, I think, made himself accessible and reminded himself of his roots and his blue-collar roots. As I say at the end of the book, that's what he needs to do. He needs to remind himself that he is Jimmy McIlroy's grandkid. His grit has grit. Whatever he does in life pales in comparison with the sacrifice that his parents made on his behalf, that his grandparents made to give his family a better life.
I love that. He's Jimmy McIlroy's grandkid. Beautiful.
Yeah.
if Irish culture, sociology has anything in common with Irish American culture and sociology, I can attest that yes, the grudges of he doesn't come around here anymore, or he has airs about himself, and that's a real thing. You can't please everybody.
There's a reason. There's a phrase Irish Alzheimer's. Yeah,
right.
Forget everything except old grudges. Yeah.
Except the grudges. So yeah, it is hard to. I can imagine be the loyal hometown son and also be global superstar and face of a sport.
Right, and walking that cultural and religious tightrope, not easy.
Not easy. He's done a pretty good job. I've always been impressed that he kept himself out of that conversation. Obviously, the Olympics brought it straight to the forefront, which there was no way that it wouldn't.
Right.
And that was you outline in your book his frustration with having to, face those questions and really, but that it did cause him to reflect on who he is and where he's from.
Right. Went from resenting the Olympics deeply to embracing them wholeheartedly once he finally got there.
Yeah, indeed. So Grand Slam, Olympic gold medal. Let's go one tournament at a time. Let's go with.
He could have had a bronze medal in Paris.
Yeah.
But he hit that poor wedge, I think, on the 70th hole, I think it was, that backed into the drink. So again, that sort of inability to control the wedge, that quick hip turn that might have led to too much spin on the ball and spinning it back in.
He's a tough guy. And I think that your takeaway from the book, the nature of, his conflicted nature, I think that's a huge part for me of his charisma as well, right?
That's exactly right.
That he does have that. And you doing the research to take that conflict from a place and see that, the way that things that, even though Rory is growing up in a new generation, in Northern Ireland, that things stick around and things are passed along, and there are things that are felt for a long time. But obviously, he's thriving.
Yes.
And because he's thriving, golf's thriving for any number of reasons, but we're
better.
excited.
Well, the ratings were up 1/3. That gives you some idea of just how big the global icon stuff is for Rory. And it was huge in the U.S. It was even bigger in the U.K. and Ireland, and per capita, the Irish viewership number of that. And this was after midnight, of course, in Ireland. By the time Rory finished up, was just amazing.
A lot of sore heads on that Monday in Ireland, I heard.
Yeah, a lot of Guinness went down. Yeah. But
and maybe a few folks wandered into work a little bit late, as they should have. Tim, congratulations on the book. It's beautifully researched, and just a ton of interesting insights, history, family, lots of golf. And then I think through it, just a genuine appreciation for, and excitement about Rory McIlroy that I think
Tom, you're very kind,
appreciate.
sir. And your contributions to the book were invaluable, and you're quoted very prominently on a number of occasions.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's a beautiful honor. I'll leave you with one question. What do you think Rory would think of the book?
I hope he reads all of it. Part of him is going to want to slug me, and part of him is going to want to hug me. I hope the hugging thing works out and wins out. Because it was written out of respect and affection, but it's also straightforward and also, kind of unflinching, unabashed, as we say on the book cover. But I think he is a beautiful Irish soul, and I hope the book captures that.
I'm wishing Rory hugs for you, indeed, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, man. I'll see you next week.
Yes, you will.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And if you enjoyed this episode, we strongly encourage you to become a member of the Golfer's Journal, or if you already are, to share it with your friends. As a reader-supported publication, we couldn't do it without you. We also couldn't do it without the help of our partners, and they are Titleist, Scotty Cameron, FootJoy, Holderness and Bourne, Omega, Charles Schwab, and BMW. We'll see you next time on the Golfers Journal podcast.